So, the most important person today for this webinar is Peter Bijtebier, whom you see a picture, but better you see him live if all is working well. And Peter has been working for 3 years now at the Cyber Security Belgium, CCB, where he is a director advising on international matters, representing CCB in many international fora and coordinating with foreign affairs the national positioning on cyber initiatives, specifically EU-related, in his capacity to lead the intra-Belgian working group on NIS and now NIS2. So we have today with us an expert whom through his contacts can share where we are, some challenges we see, and the intent today of this webinar is not only to share information, but also to gather information and gather your input and comments. As Peter will explain, this is work in progress. Peter, this being said, I hand it over to you now.
All right, thank you, Yves, for that kind introduction. Welcome to you all also from the CCB. And I will also add my apologies if you hear some background noise. They are also performing some construction in the street right next door. So welcome to a webinar on NIS2. As the abstract said, we're going to do a number of things and have a two-way conversation or a multi-way conversation. What I will do is first set the stage of where this is all coming from. Then
thanks a lot. Bye.
Someone's microphone is still open, I think. Then I'll very briefly in 2 slides remind everybody what NIS1 was about, because if there's NIS2, there's an NIS1. And then the main chunk will, of course, be an overview of the main proposals of the Commission in NIS2, followed by a brief overview of what discussions we anticipate, and followed by questions from you to you. And we will also have questions throughout the presentation, which we will try to do with Mentimeter. For the people who don't know a Mentimeter, it's quite simple. You can just go to menti.com, either via your smartphone or the computer. You will be asked to enter a code. Please enter this one, and I think Kati will post a code as well in the chat going through the presentation as well. And you will be prompted with questions whenever the next slide comes to a question. Please answer the question. I'll give you some time, and then we'll look at the answers. It's quite straightforward. So let's immediately try and do so. As I said, NIS2, so there's an NIS1. The question is your organization already in scope of NIS1? Question, so the possible answers are yes, no, or I don't know, or I'm not willing to say, or you are not under NIS1, but you think you might be under NIS2. And then the final option is no, our organization only advises or audits or controls operators. So let's give you a couple of seconds to go to Menti and fill in the question. And normally we should start seeing results here rather quickly. Let's maybe add some pressure by starting a countdown. We're not going to use the full minute. Let me see if I can refresh this, by the way. Let me see what's going on. I think a number of you will probably have responded, but the plugin in PowerPoint is making it slow, probably with so many people reacting. Well, let's try and get back on this. I'm sure there's more than 3 people participating. It will probably be a refresh thing. All right. Let's move on then. So, since NIS1 was proposed 5 to 8 years ago, cybersecurity, or at least the lack of it, has quickly become an almost daily item in the news worldwide. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen attacks on operators that are already in the scope of NIS1. So, for instance, in energy, we've seen things in regarding integrity of drinking water supply. We've seen attacks a couple of weeks ago in the hospital sector, even leading in last September, I think, to a death in Germany. But we've also seen new sectors like the food processing or production industry, and also on public administration with in Belgium 2 attacks only last month. In general, the numbers of attacks and notifications of attacks are going up. The cost is going up. In the paper that we shared with you, I think Business Europe talked about 5.5 trillion euros only in 2020. So these attacks are not going to go away by themselves, and so we need an action plan. And that is why the Commission proposed 9 days before Christmas last year a new NIS2 directive. It's a key building block that addresses specifically the resilience aspect of the cybersecurity problem, and it is the flagship of a broader European strategy on cybersecurity, which also focuses on capacity and targeting cyber criminals and diplomacy. So the trinity of commissioners that you see here presenting the strategy to the press hailed it as NIS1, but with teeth, or a refresh button on NIS, or an update of it. But others have claimed that the proposal constitutes too excessive a burden for operators and for governments. It will cost way too much, or more positively phrased, it's too ambitious. In the almost 6 months that we had since the publication, the NIS2 proposal has drawn a lot of interest. And your attendance here today, I think there were about 200 registrations for this event. It proves that there is interest, but there are also many questions and uncertainties. Is the scope enlargement going to be proportionate? How much will it cost us? Is all of this going to be enough to protect the EU? Will managers become liable for non-compliance? Will we need to locate our servers in the EU? Do we need to start implementing the proposal right now? And the last question I can answer straight away, and the answer is no, but actually yes. So in theory, you don't need to start implementing NIS2 because it's not finalized. So there was a proposal in December. You can see the timeline presumptive timeline here on the slide. It was proposed in December. The Parliament and the member states are forming their opinion, which will come somewhere in the fall or winter of 2021. Then we will have to negotiate. There will be a formal decision, probably in the course of 2022. And then member states will have to transpose that in national legislation, for which they will have 18 months. That's the current proposal. So then by that time, we're definitely into 2023. And then there will be some time probably for national requirements to apply. So probably only by 2024 will you really be obliged to implement. But of course, the cyber threats will not stop or wait until NIS2 is approved. So it's extremely important that whatever organization you are, that you already start now or continue to do so to protect yourselves as good as possible, proportionate to your risk and cost. And then you will be ready when NIS2 arrives. And even if it doesn't arrive for you, you will be ready to face the threats better. And the goal of NIS is, of course, not to force people to compliance, but to prove to the broader society that essential or important entities are doing whatever is necessary to protect all of us. All right, so that question is clear. The other questions that I mentioned are less clear because it's not final, but that also means that we can give our opinion on it and maybe shape the debate, and that's what this webinar is about. So again, I said, let's do a brief recap of NIS1 before we jump into the NIS2 proposals. So very, very quickly, I think this slide gives a good overview of what the NIS1 directive proposed in 2013, approved in 2016 is all about. So at the top, you see national authorities had to implement strategies And they also had to cooperate either on a technical level via the CSERT network at the bottom here, or on a policy level through the cooperation group. And within that cooperation, the essentials were that specific types of operators in specific sectors needed to be identified. So we had digital infrastructure, energy, healthcare, drinking water, transport, banking, financial markets. These were operators of essential services. So within these sectors, national authorities had to make risk analysis and identify operators specifically. And then there were 3 other categories of digital service providers: marketplaces, search engines, and cloud computing. These were automatically put in scope via a definition in the NIS1 directive. I can't tell you which the operators are in Belgium. Of course, when we're thinking about specific sectors, I don't know, like transportation in the railways sector, I think it's probably quite clear which entities are important in Belgium, but the list is confidential, so I can't say more about this. But these operators, all of them, they had to do 2 things. They had to report their significant incidents, and they had to implement a specific set of security requirements. That's NIS1 in a nutshell: identification, and then requirements and incidents reporting. So in Belgium, we transposed that in the law of 7 April of 2019. And so the CCB was the central authority, and with the help of the crisis center, the sectoral authorities, they were the ones that identified the operators. So for the banking sector, it was the National Bank and the FSMA. The Federal Public Service of the Economy for the sector of energy, also responsible for the digital service providers. Federal Public Service Transport for mobility, of course. Healthcare was by the Ministry of Healthcare. The BIPT, so the Belgian Institute for Post and Telecommunication for the digital infrastructures, and a special committee for drinking water. So they made all the decisions, coordinated by the CCB. We also had an incident notification platform where you could notify your incidents to everybody at all of these authorities at the same time. So that was the structure. What did we ask of operators? This is an overview. I won't go into detail, but it gives the timeline. So once an operator was identified, they had to provide us with a description of their network and a point of contact so that we could contact them, and that we had good communication going back and forth, that we knew how they were structured. They had to draw up an information system policy. They had to implement it and do a first internal audit to test how things were going, what needed improvement. And at the end of the cycle, the first cycle, did I lose the presentation?
No, it's fine.
Oh,
It's okay.
I got it pop up here. At the end of the first cycle, there's the first external audit. And so the dotted line gives you where we are right now. There we go. So in the directive itself, it was stated that we needed to do a review of how NIS1 was working, and we had to do it by 2021. And by we mean Europe, and actually the European Commission. So they gave a number of conclusions, listed the most significant ones listed here. So the Commission concluded that NIS1 was actually too limited in scope, with threats increasing, with interconnectivity increasing in society since 2016. It was needed that we cover a larger portion of the economy and society captured in the NIS1, just to make sure that the basic level of protection is still high enough to protect our way of life. Another conclusion was that there was not enough clarity for the operators of essential services on the scope, nor on what the national competences were for the digital service providers. Another conclusion, there was ineffective monitoring and enforcement regimes. There were significant differences in the ways that national authorities approached things, which was difficult for operators that are active in multiple member states. There was too much of a variation in the resources, maturity levels, and also the resilience. Too much variation between member states, but also between sectors. So they want to try and make it more homogeneous. and in general, not enough information sharing. In Belgium, we took a long time to implement it, but we're getting there. Definitely, we're still perfectly on track. We got to know the operators better, but it is true that it took a long time that would be much more useful if we could go to implementing these measures much more quickly. So from all of this and the threats I said at the start, NIS2 emerged or needed to emerge. But before we jump into that, another question, let's see if it works this time a little better. The question is, do you think your organization will raise its cybersecurity level sufficiently to address increasing threats without a legislative push, such as NIS2? So either you think your organization will increase its measures, or you think they won't do it automatically. You're not sure. So the question is really, do you think that legislation like this is needed? If the slide doesn't update by itself, I'll give you a few seconds again, but it might be just too heavy. At the end of the presentation, I will close this down and share the slides in the actual presentation itself from Mentimeter, and then we'll see the results, but I'll give you a little time. I'm actually going to check it real quickly myself if there's something wrong with it from my side, or rather from your sides. Let's see.
I think, Peter, we have a problem because a few people entered it and we don't see anything.
Yeah, I think it's probably because the questions are appearing. It's probably not updating fast enough. You can test these things all you want, which we did, but of course something is going to go wrong. But as I said, at the end, I'll go back to the real presentation and we'll see the results, which will be interesting, I'm sure.
It worked very well yesterday, so you did your work well, Peter.
And this morning as well. So let's do it the old-fashioned way with a good old presentation and then questions at the end. So NIS2, as I said in the beginning, it's a proposal. So everything I say here is work in progress, and we welcome your input. So these, and I thank the Commission for this slide, are the three main pillars of what NIS2 is composed about. And the people who want to read real text at the bottom of the slide, you can find a link. You can find it yourself as well. It's available in all the official languages of the Union. But in a nutshell, these are the three main things. So on the left, you see member state capabilities. So national authorities need to be strengthened. They need to have national strategies. This already existed in NIS1, but needs to be reinforced. There will also be a framework for coordinated vulnerability disclosure, giving ethical hackers, let's say, a legal way to disclose that they've seen a threat somewhere. And also, and this is also new in NIS2, more insistence on a crisis management framework. So how industry and especially member states work together on incidents. So that's on a national level. On an international level, on the right-hand side, there's insisted focus on working together. So the cooperation group, which already existed, gets a little bit more tasks, the CSIRT network as well. So building on the trust and cooperation that exists. Cyclone is a specific mechanism linked to crisis management and brings together the national authorities, which it's a project that's already running, but they want to give a legal basis to it. The coordinated vulnerability disclosures on a national level need to be in somehow, if it's beneficial, linked to each other on a European level with possibly a registry of vulnerabilities that NISA will manage. Countries need to do peer reviews of each other to make sure that the level of supervision is sufficient and homogeneous and the same. And NISA will also give a biannual cybersecurity report on the state of the cybersecurity union, let's say. But today, as time is limited and there's so much in this proposal, I'll try and focus on the middle aspect. So the risk management, which focuses mostly on what operators should do. So there's three things really in there. Operators still need to implement security measures. was already in NIS1, but it's extended now. Companies also need to notify incidents already in NIS1, but it's proposed that they also notify threats or near misses, and with somewhat more specifications on how they need to notify incidents and when. Most importantly, what's new in NIS2 is the accountability for top management regarding non-compliance. So what I'd like to do, given that there's so much in there, is focus on 5 questions really, which are very practical. Will this whole proposal apply to my organization? What measures will I have to take if I'm in the scope? Who will my supervisory authority be? And how will I be controlled? And finally, ending, what sanctions might there be? So let's jump in the first question. Will it apply to me? So in NIS1, there was an identification by the authority. What's new here is that there will be more sectors than in NIS1. There will be more operators in scope, and there will be a new method of identification. Again, I say there will be, but it's still a proposal. In terms of sectors, the things that this is an overview slide. The things in blue is what already exists in NIS1. The things in red is what is proposed to be added in NIS2. Important before I delve into the concrete sectors is that the difference between essential entities and important entities is also introduced. So some sectors will have essential entities and some sectors will have important entities. They'll have to implement the same obligations or requirements in terms of security. The main difference will be that they will be supervised in a different manner. So essential entities will be supervised or controlled more strictly and have higher sanctions, while important entities will be only checked after there's a notification of something going wrong or a presumption of some sort. So there's a distinction between 2 categories here. And so in terms of sectors, there are some sectors being added, like wastewater or public administration or space in the essential categories, and in the important entities, it's the postal and courier services, waste management, chemicals, so manufacture, production, distribution, foods as well, production, processing, and distribution. All kinds of manufacturing is added, and this will also significantly be decided in the terms of the NASE codes, who is in scope and who not. And apart from adding specific sectors, there will also be specific subsectors added, like, for instance, in energy, electricity, oil, and gas were already in there, but hydrogen and district heating will be added. And in terms of electricity, also production is brought in scope, as well as markets and aggregation, etc. So for instance, the nuclear sector, which was not in the scope of NIS1, will be in the scope of NIS2, at least again, is proposed to be in the scope. Same goes for the healthcare sector, where the focus now was on the actual people giving or institutions providing the healthcare. They will add reference labs, research and manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, medical devices, also electronic communications. So telecom is also going to be added. They were a lex specialis system under NIS1, but the proposal is to bring them in as well. And we see here social networks as well. And cloud services, which were in this list, were moved to digital infrastructure. So their cloud services are deemed essential. So this is the enlargement of the number of sectors that are in scope.
Peter, there is a question about insurance. Is insurance sector and, for example, health insurance included? Or not any of the insurance? Yeah.
Not that I am aware of, no. This is a question that I also already had, and it's interesting to hear that others have the same question. So it's noted. It would be interesting to hear from the person asking that question if he or she thinks that it should be included or not. So that's the sectors. If we look at within each sector, there also we see an enlargement of the scope. So first of all, the manner in which we approach identification will change. Instead of laborious risk analysis and then formal identification, the Commission proposes to have a clear-cut definition, clear criteria. And these criteria will be if your organization is active in some way or another in one of the sectors that I listed, and if they are above a certain size, then they will be in scope. And the size that the Commission proposed is all the non-small or micro entities. So concretely, if you are an organization that is active in one of these sectors and you have more than 50 employees or more than 10 million euros of turnover, annual turnover, it's more precise than this, but if you're one of these, if you fall in this category, then you will be in the scope of NIS, and you have to implement the requirements. Of course, size cap is too uniform, so we might be missing out on entities. So to compensate that, national authorities can also, irrespective of size, identify extra entities because they're essential or pose a high risk. And then a final layer there is that NIS2 is conceived to be, well, an umbrella legislation, or more providing a baseline for all different kinds of sectors. And there's many different sectoral legislations in negotiation. For instance, DORA is there for the financial sector. Telecom has its proper legislation, the critical entities, trust service providers, etc. The idea is that NIS2 lays a baseline, and then if there is specific sectoral legislation that is at least equivalent or more specific, then they will take precedence. It's there to make sure that everybody at least does at least the same or more. So there was another question here that you can fill in if you like. I'm afraid I'll probably have to wait a couple of seconds to give you the time to do it, even though the results might not appear here, because if I go to the next slide, you won't have time to fill it in anymore. The question is, do you think that the proposed scope is too big, too small, or just right, or that it needs to be more focused, or that it will depend on the requirements? It'll depend on how much the Commission asks us to do, whether we think that the entities should be in scope or not. All right, let's do a second question before I go on. Do you think that operators, to identify them, do you think that there should be a clear criteria or more risk-based identification? So the options are one clear-cut, uniform identification mechanism so that we can move on more quickly to protecting them. Maybe you think, yes, that criteria is good, but it can't be a size cap. That's just, the size is not a good criteria to do so. We can find other ways perhaps. Or you think, no, it should be based purely on risk analysis, or some way a balanced mix, I don't know, that everybody above a certain size in specific sectors is in the scope, but then there's an extra level for those who are more at risk. So these are the options. All right, I think that's you'll have more time, I think, to fill it in. So second question, looking at the time, what measures will I have to take? This tries and give you an overview of everything that you will have to do. First, you need to do a risk analysis to determine the proportionality of the measures that you need to take. Then you'll have to implement minimum security requirements, and they are in Article 18. They're quite broad. Some would say they're too specific already, but what they basically say is that you need to have, you need to be doing incident handling, prevention, detection, response. You need to have a business continuity plan. You need to implement encryption and cryptography. You need to have policies and procedures in place, and you need to test them. The manner in which you do so, member states can give more specific guidance if they want, but the technical details are not in NIS1. Important is also supply chain, that as an operator you're responsible to look at the risks that your supply chain poses to you. Very important in NIS2 is that management will have to approve the cybersecurity measures and will be accountable for them, so they need some form of training. The training itself is also obligatory under NIS2. Again, you'll need to notify significant incidents, but also near misses or threats. Specifically for incidents, you'll have to notify within 24 hours that something is going on, not necessarily all the details. Later you can do more substantial, and at the end you can do a final report. In Belgium, I think we already have this system a little bit in place, but the European Union wants to have it across the board. And finally, NIS2 has the option for member states and the Union to impose specific certification under the Cybersecurity Act, so European schemes, on operators of essential services. It's not standards, it needs to be implemented, and someone needs to decide that this is going to be obligatory. That's in terms of what will I have to do if I'm in scope. The third question is, who will be my supervisory authority? There it depends on the sector and on the member state. There's two systems of supervision in the text. Either for the most of the entities, it's just cumulative EU jurisdiction. Wherever you offer a service, there you will also be controlled and supervised. But of course, if you do so, yeah. Eve, did you want to say something? Okay. Of course, member states will have to work closely together. It's only for specific digital infrastructures listed here, so domain name servers, TLDs, cloud computing, content delivery, these specific categories, they will have to register themselves, and the jurisdiction will be where they have their main establishments. And this is defined as where they take their decisions on cyber risk management. So two systems, and it will also, of course, depend on the member state, who your actual authority will be. Every member state can decide for themselves. So in Belgium, probably if you're active in the transport sector, you will fall, needs to be decided again, but you will probably fall under the jurisdiction of the Minister of Transport. And of course, to make sure that everybody is controlled in the same way, authorities need to have a minimum set of powers in all the countries. So the fourth question, how will I be controlled? Again, the two systems, essential entities and important entities, mostly the same. So on and off-site inspections, targeted security audits, security scans, and authorities can request information. But specifically for essential entities, you can be controlled in a very active manner, even before there's any sign that something is wrong. There will be regular audits, and you will have to prove that you're implementing cybersecurity policies. It's a little bit in line of what Belgium is already doing now. There might be some more specifications there. And then finally, what sanctions might there be? In general, authorities can ask you, well, can give you warnings or give you binding instructions to do something if you're not implementing the requirements as you should be doing. They can level administrative fines, and it's up to member states to set a maximum limit on this. And Europe says that that maximum limit of fines should be at least 10 million or 2% global revenue. But of course, these fines should be dissuasive, effective, and of course proportionate. Authorities can also make public statements about infringements, or order the companies to do so. Another novel and controversial proposition is that authorities can publicly identify the legal and natural persons that would be responsible for an infringement. And especially for essential entities, management will be liable for non-compliance. There might be temporary bans on managers, and authorities can designate a monitoring officer to make sure that everything is done what should be done. So these are different kinds of sanctions. Again, I had two questions before swiftly moving to the final point of what discussions that we can expect. So the question here is, do you think the current distinction between important versus essential is useful? Either yes, no. It's a good idea to have different layers, but it needs to be developed more. I'll give you a few seconds here. All right. There we go. In your opinion, this is the second question. Do you think top management should be liable for non-compliance with NIS obligations? Yes, they should. No, they shouldn't. It's more nuanced than that. It cuts into trust, or they should be responsible, but maybe not personally liable. All kinds of solutions. I'll move on because I think the question will remain active if I move on to the next slide. So I think this is the main last slide that I want to show here. The different discussions. There's a lot of aspects in the legislation, so there's a lot of points on which we can discuss. Of course, proportionality is one of the big ones. Is it going to cost so much versus will it really secure us? The Commission estimated that the number of entities in scope will move from 15,000 now to 110,000. It's just an estimation, but I think it corresponds to what we've been looking at on a Belgian level. Identification, of course, do we want uniform criteria, or do we want to look at risk? Or do we want to insert different levels of differentiation between the types of entities? A lot of discussion on horizontal versus specific sectoral legislation, making sure that we do not have double obligations, because that would be detrimental, I think, to the market. The whole question of jurisdiction, do we want one stop shop like for the specific digital infrastructures, or do we want all the member states to be responsible together? How about that accountability of management? Is that not too disproportionate, or is it necessary to make sure that companies really comply? Do we want specific sectors in the scope, such as public administration, or not? The Commission has a number of specific powers in the proposal, that they can impose extra specifications on how and when, specifically how incidents need to be reported, but also specific security requirements or certification. So how much power do we want the Commission to have to make quick and effective decisions here? And of course, incident reporting. Is the period okay? What about the specific thresholds? So these are still all open points, and there's many more open points as well, but I think these are the main ones on which discussion is going on in the Parliament, between the member states. A lot of papers and opinions of specific interest groups are coming out. So again, some questions, but I think we can move on to the discussion between ourselves, and I think, given that we should probably look at more time for actual questions. So here the question is, do you think who should make sure that the supply chain is covered? It's an important aspect in NIS2. Do you think that the operators themselves should be mostly responsible, making sure that their supply chain risk is covered via contracts? Should it be the member states that impose specific obligations on the suppliers? Should it actually be the union on the European level, or should it be a mix of all three? I think my explanation gave you a little bit of time. And then question here, do you think small and medium enterprises should be excluded from the scope except when they're critical? Because medium enterprises are in scope, it might be a little bit excessive burden. And I've heard several opinions that that they should be out of scope. So I think we can. I think I'm gonna thank you for your attention for the main presentation and move on to a moderated set of questions. So I'll give the floor back to Yves and leave you with an open question that you can do in a word cloud here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. Oh, there's an echo. Do you hear me?
I hear you, yeah, but I'll maybe turn off my own microphone.
Okay, is this better? Peter, you hear me? Everyone hears me? Okay.
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Peter. Thank you also for the audience. We always had more than 120 people attending, so it means, Peter, that you have been able to keep everyone motivated and interested. And I've seen a lot of questions in the chat. What I propose is that we go maybe to the main topics and take a few questions on each topic. The first one, there were quite some questions around, will it apply to me? There were questions around insurance, public administration, manufacturing. Is it an exhaustive list? Is there a portal? Maybe, Peter, you can try to respond already to those 4 questions, and I would invite the people that put a question on whether it applies to me or not to maybe pose their question if not already answered by these 4 initial questions. So insurance, public sector, manufacturing, is it exhaustive? And is there a portal where people can find out if they fall under the NIS2 regulation or not? Because apparently it's not 100% clear.
All right, well, I didn't have time to go through the chat, but so as far as I have studied it, insurance is not in scope. The public administration sector is in scope, but with specific tweaks. So there's specific requirements in article, in the definition of what a public administration is. I think it's Article 4. So security services will be out of scope in the proposal, but not every public administration will be in scope. So you need to contribute to the market in some way, have certain responsibilities. So let's say the National Ballet will not fall into this category, and let's say state military intelligence will also not fall because they're that's the current proposal, but a number of member states have specific concerns about this. Manufacturing, I can answer that with the portal as well. So there's no portal yet because the proposal is not final. But what the Commission did is they put all the types of, so the sectors and types of entities in an annex to the legislation. And I'll ask Cathy and Yves to share that, at least the link or maybe the document itself with the people who attended here. And there you can check whether you would fall into that category by going through the annex per sector. And specifically for manufacturing, there's a lot of things that need to be cleared up. They're using a lot of the NACE index scores. And actually, I'd be very happy to hear from people from the manufacturing industry to help us maybe understand better who or who not would fall into the categories and if this is a good or a bad idea. Did I answer all of them?
I think so. There was another question also from Guy Kindermans, where you offer services monitored. What with a company as Fastly? Is it in scope of NIS or when outside of the EU? Maybe Guy, you can clarify the question if it's not clear.
Well, yeah.
Guy, is Guy still on the line? Yes, Guy, can you maybe rephrase your question? Because I'm not sure I put it in the right context.
Actually, I raised the question because of the Fastly event, disturbing, for instance, governmental services, etc. in the United Kingdom. And clearly this is a US-based company. So that could be an essential company based outside, delivering a service to European companies, organizations in scope. So how about monitoring them? Are they in scope, etc.? So clearly they are part of the infrastructure that's outside of the EU, but still indeed vital to the good functioning of the European digital environment. So that's the reason for my question.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. If I don't know the company that well, but from what I've understood, they offer cloud services and other specific services. So given the sector that they belong to, they would fall into scope. The fact that they're based outside of the Union does not impact the fact that they would be in scope if they offer services in the Union. What the Commission proposes is that if you are an entity offering services within the Union, but you have your main establishment outside of the Union, you have to indicate an establishment in the Union. So you have to put yourself under a specific jurisdiction, either of all the countries or either of a specific country. So it's very important, and there's a lot of interest from specific member states that we definitely do not impose obligations only on those who are established in the Union, but it's there to protect our way of life within the Union. So I think a company like that would fall into scope, yes.
Okay. Peter, I had a question on the size of the SMEs. Is it correct that it will be in strict sense definition, less than 50 people or less than 10 million revenue that are exempted? So it would mean for Belgium, we have a lot of SMEs above 50 people or above 10 million, that actually a lot of our companies, which we call SMEs in the maybe broader definition, would fall under NIS2. Is that correct?
It is correct, yes. So if you need to have less than 50 people and less than 10 million annual revenue to fall outside of the scope. From the side of the CCB, we think this, I think I can disclose this, we think this is very excessive and disproportionate, and we would like to have that raised to exclude all of the SMEs from the scope. Because indeed in Belgium we have a lot of them, and it might be, specifically given the whole framework, it might be an excessive burden for them. But we'd be very interested to hear if the participants here agree with that.
Okay. I would like then to move to some questions related to the second topic, the measures. There is an interesting question on, have we learned anything from the GDPR one-stop mechanism and assignment of supervisory authorities?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on how GDPR has functioned, but these questions are indeed being asked. There is inspiration being drawn from that, and there is a lot of discussion between member states on how we need to do this, because a company is in scope based on the services that they offer in specific member states. But if they do so in several member states, that means several supervisory authorities. What if they don't necessarily work that well together with each other? What about sanctions? Do they impose both of these countries do so? So the idea of having a single point of contact in every member state for them to go to, it's an interesting idea. There's definitely a need for that, I think, to create clarity to the industry. But it's definitely on the radar of looking into best practices learned there without losing any of the lessons that we've learned from NIS1, with very clear structures of who is in charge.
Yeah, okay. There's then a question about, it's more around controlling the responsibility of the suppliers to parties that fall under NIS2. What is their responsibility, the supply chain and the people involved in the supply chain? Is that well regulated? Is that still being discussed? I mean, could you elaborate on that?
So this is a very important topic in NIS2. What is being proposed is that in first instance, and mainly, the operators themselves are responsible for mitigating the risk of their own supply chain, either via contracts or in another specific way. One way in which the union can help is either via certification schemes via the Cybersecurity Act, where for specific technologies a scheme can be created and then made mandatory, not only for products that you develop, but also for using specific products. You can only use certified products, for instance. That can help in mitigating the risk. And the NIS Cooperation Group and the Commission and the member states can also, much like they did for 5G, make coordinated risk assessments on specific technologies or products in order to give guidance to companies. Now, some member states feel that the emphasis should remain on the operators themselves. Others think that some companies are just way too big or have an excessive monopolized position for operators to really negotiate with them. So it's on the radar, and we're looking at making this as balanced as possible. And again, we'd welcome opinions on whether you think it should go one way or the other.
Okay. In how far is cybersecurity aligned to the timing of NIS2? Because obviously there is some complementarity. I mean, the Cybersecurity Act certifications and the processes will feed or support or enhance or help implementation of NIS2?
Well, so Cybersecurity Act came out 2 years ago, almost to the day, and we're now we're working on 3 schemes specifically. So common criteria, which might be finalized and available at the end of this year, next year maybe. There's the cloud services that is being developed right now. It won't come this year, maybe next year, available to the markets. And I think a scheme on 5G was launched as well. So these schemes, it takes time to build them, but it will also take time for NIS2 to be finalized. So by the time NIS2 is finalized, I think the cybersecurity scheme framework will have matured and maybe have several more schemes available for national authorities or the Commission to impose specific certifications. So I think the timing there would actually be very well aligned.
Okay. Peter, there's a general question to you. What's your personal view? Do we need more regulation as in NIS2 or better implementation of the existing regulation as in NIS1?
Well, I'm a moderate person, balanced in everything. I think both are important. I think now we need to focus on the ground. We need to focus on better implementation. But NIS2 is there to also look at the future. I mean, this is in legislation that will only come really into force by 2024. A lot can happen in 3 years. And the next time that we're going to review that will probably be again in 5 to 10 years, just like NIS1 was proposed in 2013. We're now 2021. So, I mean, we need to focus on more action and making sure that people do what is required and incentivize them to do so. But we also have to make sure that in 5 to 10 years' time, well, maybe not our children, but at least we ourselves can have some guarantee that the companies that give us important services, that they really protect themselves sufficiently. So the requirements are not there to stifle industry. It's really to just, as a society, make sure that everything is needed. Everything that is needed is actually done. If you're already doing it right now, that's not a problem. Of course, it needs to be proportionate, and that's what the discussion is about.
Okay, there's a comment, and it's actually also a bit of a question, or it's interesting to get your feeling about this. Dirk says, it's too bad that NIS2 is a directive and not yet a regulation. This will be quite interesting to see the difference between MS in implementation of between the member states, sorry, of implementing the NIS2. What's your view on that, and how is this working actually for NIS1? That was also a directive, I understand.
Yes.
Is there then some consolidation? I mean, or is somebody looking that the implementation of the directive is actually quite at par between the different member states? I mean, is there some kind of control?
Well, so this is the whole frame. So NIS1 was a directive, NIS2 is a directive. There were some people thinking about making it a regulation, so like the GDPR.
Yeah.
Problem here is, of course, that it's a little bit of a two-headed beast, NIS. We're looking at the market and economic services, but it's also about national security, and national security is a member state responsibility that's in the European treaties. So we can't do away with that very quickly. And I'm not saying anything of whether we want to or not. But this was a concern specifically for the Commission as well. So they implemented or inserted some phrases to make sure that member states that there's more harmonization across the Union, because that was one of the problems with NIS1. So peer reviews between countries are being proposed. The level of, let's say, certifications which link specific ideas with technical requirements is, if there are European certifications, that also inserts a European level. Cooperation groups still, people, so member states coming together, making sure that requirements are aligned and sharing ideas here. But so uniformity is good and harmonization is good, but we must also not be blind to the fact that there are differences between member states, what they require for their society, and between sectors also. So there, again, here there needs to be a balance between clarity and harmonization, but also making sure it is appropriate and proportionate specifically for the region that it is intended. So again, a balance, and that's what the discussion is about.
Okay, Peter, we're coming close to the end time. I had a final question. I think also the audience will appreciate. The title was NIS2, NIS with teeth, or biting off more than we can chew. What's your opinion or the opinion of CCB on this statement?
Well, if you're phrasing it like that, you can only bite off more than you can chew if you have teeth. I think I think there was definitely a need for looking to the future and making sure things can proceed more quickly, that we can make sure that the level of security goes up. But some of the measures in there, according to the CCB, are a little bit disproportionate, for instance, including some SMEs. So that's something that we would like to see gone. Some of the ways of in which member states will control their entities are a little bit disproportionate. There's not enough clarity on some aspects. So we at the CCB, and of course we're the national authority, but we have to do this with other sectoral authorities, and we have to discuss with other member states. But I think the position of the CCB is that, again, here we need to find a good line between giving it teeth and not biting off more than we can chew. So we would like the scope to be reduced, but still have more power to enforce what needs to be done.
Okay. Practically speaking, Peter, can we share the results later on from Mentimeter? Do you think we could be able to provide that to the Cybersecurity Coalition? And can we maybe also ask you on the detailed questions? There are a few ones that we didn't address that we would ask you to get back to the person who put the question. Is that reasonable, possible?
It's even desirable, yes. I
Okay.
think, yeah, I might even open up. So here there's a Menti with questions that you can go through yourself. The other one was moderated by the presentation, but maybe I'll open up the first one as well, so that other people who couldn't join can go through it again and add their comments, and that we can then share the results in a couple of days' time. I think that would be a good idea. Yeah. Okay. And I'll answer the questions that weren't answered here. Okay,
very good. I guess, respect of time, we will close now. Obviously, the discussion is only started. I think it was a fantastic initiative of the coalition with the help of the experts of the Cyber Center Security Belgium to organize this webinar. I think we still have a long way to go. That's my take on it. The input and the interaction, which was good, we had to limit it, but as you will see, a lot of things were not fully covered. So there's definitely ground in the coming months to further engage with all stakeholders and then use, obviously, the privileged conduit and position that the CCB holds in this debate to funnel our recommendations and our concerns. And I think as we've discussed, and we discuss all the time in the Cybersecurity Coalition, I think there's a key message. Nobody should wait to increase his or her own cyber resilience, irrespective whether you're in government, critical sector or not. It can only help you because it's clear that Europe is serious with it and that it will not get away. I think it will only get, depending how you look at it, worse or better. I'm personally convinced, talking also for Agoria, that increasing cyber resilience can be a business enabler, and it should be a business enabler, and it should be a balanced approach. And I think that's also from the little input we have gathered today, the feeling that I'm taking away from this webinar, that people want this balance, people recognize the importance. So on the one hand, we should be grateful that Europe is taking this seriously. It may take a bit longer than ideally it would be, but I think if we look at GDPR, we've taken the lead versus other continents. it seems also with NIS and NIS2, Europe is leading, and let's hope indeed that a good implementation will be to the benefit of a better society and protect us from continuing the good use of technology to enhance quality of lives and bring prosperity. So I would like to leave all of you. Thank you very much again for people organizing this. Peter, thank you for a very detailed presentation. We will follow up. A lot of thanks also to the people who put questions in the chat, also put white papers and links to other interesting publications. We will see that it doesn't get lost. And I would always invite you to closely watch the good agenda of the coalition for upcoming webinars, position papers, and other useful information.